Good afternoon. My name is Trent Ferris. I'm Public Information Officer for the York County Sheriff's Office. To my right is Deputy Kim Morehouse. She's the Assistant Public Information Officer and our Crime Prevention Officer. Today, we're going to give you some more information about the events that took place Friday night and throughout the weekend about Joshua Matthew Gross, the case involving him. On Friday night, shortly after 11 p.m., Joshua Matthew Gross was booked into the York County Detention Center for charges of murder, attempted murder, and grand larceny. From that time he was booked into the detention center, Mr. Gross was very uncooperative with detention center officers and staff. Early this morning, Mr. Gross attempted to drown himself in his cell toilet, and he also hit his head on his cell wall several times. Detention officers restrained Mr. Gross by putting him in a restraining chair for his safety, other inmates' safety, and detention officer safety. Once in the chair, Mr. Gross was still very combative and kept hitting his head on the back of the restraint chair. Officers then attempted to place a helmet on Mr. Gross's head to prevent him from further injury. At that time, officers noticed a laceration on the back of Mr. Gross's head. EMS was called to assess his injuries. This was approximately between 1:20 a.m. and 1:46 a.m. this morning. Mr. Gross was so combative and aggressive, a full medical exam could not be performed at the time. According to the EMS crew, the lacerations did not require stitches, so the decision was made not to transport him to the hospital. At 2:20 a.m., during normal rounds, detention officers found Mr. Gross unresponsive. CPR was immediately performed, and EMS was called back to the detention center at 2:20 a.m. CPR was performed from 2:20 a.m. to 2:29 a.m. And according to EMS, it appears Mr. Gross was in cardiac arrest when they arrived the second time. He was then transported to Piedmont Medical Center where CPR was performed from here until there. Joshua Matthew Gross was pronounced dead shortly thereafter this morning at the emergency room at 3:05 a.m. An autopsy will be performed on Mr. Gross tomorrow, Monday, October 21st. The State Law Enforcement Division, or SLED, is investigating. Currently, there are 369 inmates housed in the York County Detention Center, and we had 20 officers on duty last night. As far as the investigation from Friday night's incident, I have incident reports and warrants for you. I'll give you those to you later, but just a quick synopsis of what took place Friday night. We believe that in an attempt to steal Mrs. Thomas's vehicle, Gross struck her with the vehicle as he was leaving. Gross then goes to Mrs. Gross, the second victim's house, and physically assaults her and hits her also with the car. In the process, he also assaulted a third victim. We're still trying to get the motive of why this took place on Friday night, and we don't want to speculate on the motive until all the facts are gathered in the case. We don't have much else to say, but I'll take a few questions at this time.
Is Sandy Gross his stepmom? How is she related to him?
It's his mother.
For the third victim, was there any relation to Sandra Gross?
I'm not sure of that at this time.
Any idea, did he just die of a heart attack, or are you still looking into that?
We're still looking into that. The coroner will have an autopsy tomorrow, and full tests will be performed.
So he was combative as soon as you guys took him into custody?
From the moment he was booked into the jail. He was very combative and very uncooperative with our detention officers.
When people are combative, is that standard? What's the standard procedure? Is there a standard procedure that you guys do?
The procedure is if somebody's very combative, a danger to themselves, a danger to detention officers, in danger to the other inmates housed in the detention center, a restraint chair is used to control that person until they calm down to a point where they can be removed from the restraining chair.
Will SLED or the Department of Corrections be investigating this?
SLED has been called in. They are investigating this case, and the South Carolina Department of Corrections also has been notified.
Are any officers being placed on administrative leave, anything like that?
No, nothing like that at this time. All our officers, detention officers, did exactly what they were supposed to do last night.
How often, or when was the last time an inmate died in custody here?
I believe it was, we had a suicide 6 weeks ago. SLED is still investigating that case. They're waiting for toxicology reports to come back before they can finish out that case.
There were reports of a nearby wreck at the time, unrelated to the incident, but people believed it might be part of the accident. Was that at all?
I don't know any information about
Okay.
that. Any other
Miss
questions?
Gross was one of the victims. What was the name of the other victim?
Is Sandra Thomas and Sandra Gross.
Sandra Thomas and Sandra Gross. Were they related?
Sandra Thomas
Yeah.
with Mr. Gross? No.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Can
Good.
Can you go over that one last part about the restraint chair and how officers were trying to get him to stop and the laceration? I was just unclear on that particular aspect.
When he was in his cell, being combative and doing harm to himself, officers then went into the cell, restrained him, put him into the restraining chair as a way to help prevent him from causing further injury to himself. While he was in the restraint chair, he was also banging his head on the back of the chair. At that time, officers got a helmet that goes with the restraint chair to put it on his head to prevent that injury from getting any worse. And then that's when they noticed the lacerations on the back of his head, and that's when EMS was called.
So did he die in the jail itself or when he got to the hospital?
That's unclear at this time. We're trying to still figure that out. I do know CPR was performed from 2:20 a.m. to 2:29 a.m. here at the detention center until EMS arrived at 2:29. And then when he was transported to the hospital, they said they were still doing CPR on him en route to the hospital.
Is it safe to say that he died from injuries that he got within the jail?
It's unclear at this time.
Was there any time where he was placed under suicide watch?
No, I don't know that information right now. But I can tell you he was very uncooperative and very combative.
Did he ever at any point confess to the murders?
I don't have any information on that this time.